playing field or wherever they are. A teacher overheard the conversation and reprimanded them for talking about Jesus at school. Here's another story. A fourth grader, and again, I want you to think about the context here. A fourth grader bowed his head at lunchtime. Okay, bowed his head and whispered a silent prayer. And he's not bothering anybody. It's lunchtime. He bows his head. He ended up having to go to the principal's office. This is in the United States, by the way. This is not somewhere else in some repressive country. This is our freedom of religion country. In New York, third story here. Is this in the way, by the way? Mm-hmm. Is it? Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. In New York, a third grade teacher stopped a child from reading the Bible in her free time. Once again, you notice the context in the free time. The crying child was told never to bring the forbidden book to school again. So something's happened.
You can take the Quran.
What'd you say?
You can take the Quran.
You can take the Quran, probably. So something's going on here. Something has changed in our society. So you have a handout here, and what I thought we could do is walk through, after these scary examples, walk through some of the issues dealing with tolerance. I thought maybe we could start with how in the world did we get here? And what's going on to lead us to this repressive, what else can you say? It's a repressive system. Well, the leading thought, the leading philosophy for a long time, for hundreds of years, was called modernism. The idea that you could use your reason, and your reason would allow you to find truth, and truth was out there someplace. Truth was something that everybody could find. So you had things like discovering where the world was. Was it going around the sun, or was the sun going around us? There was some kind of truth that you could discover in science if you used your head. If you created enough calculus, whatever, do your math, whatever, you could find truth out there. Truth was available for everybody. We just had to use our minds. There was reason dominated. Well, about 50 years ago, 40 years ago, something like that, a new wave came. It's called postmodernism. Can you hear the words there? Post, after modernism. And a lot of people rejected that. They said, truth is not out there. Truth is inside each little cultural group. In other words, let's take religious groups. The Mormons have their truth. The Jehovah's Witnesses have their truth. The Buddhists have their truth. The Christians have their truth. And each one, here's the catch, each one is equally valid. Isn't that weird to think of? It makes my head hurt to think about that. You can't distinguish between them. They have their own truths. Language is kind of difficult to get across. We can't trust language. And so the idea of reason disappears. It's you make it up, and if that's your truth, good for you. And maybe you've heard things like that. People saying, well, that's just your truth. You ever heard that? That's just your beliefs. In other words, good for you, but I don't have to believe it. I'll have my own truth. That's what's replaced modernism. And the result, as you can probably guess, are all sorts of things. We get multiculturalism out of that. In other words, if truth is inside each culture, each culture or group is equally worth praising. And so what do you get in schools today? A week devoted to this group, a week devoted to this group. The new textbooks are coming out now, and it's every group gets its own little special time. And they're all equal. There's never any criticism made. And that's part of this whole new tolerance. We get religious pluralism. All roads lead to God. Every group is genuine and valid and as good as any other religion. So Christianity is brought down as an equal with all the others. And we're going to talk about what that ends up providing in our society. But does that make sense as far as just the postmodern view of things? Everybody comes up with their own truth. You shouldn't criticize anybody else because you got your truth, but why are you criticizing their truth, right? That's theirs. Forget about them. Leave them alone. Let them have their truth. So that's where we've come, and that's why you get stories like this. Right? People are not tolerant as they used to be. So we need to talk for just a second here. What has happened to that definition of tolerance? Well, the old definition was you're supposed to respect, you're supposed to have respect, even if you disagreed about what the person believed. You show the respect for that individual. You may disagree, you may not approve of what the person is doing, but you at least respect them as an individual. And that's where we came up with the verse in Colossians and Ephesians of bearing up with each other. I don't agree with necessarily how you're doing things, but I will put up with. That's tolerance. Tolerance is putting up with what you don't agree with. That's not the new definition. When you go out in the society today and they talk about tolerance, what are they saying? All views are equally true, and what do you have to do?
Accept them.
You have to accept them, and not just accept them, you have to praise them, and you have to honor them, you have to value them. Good for you. I'm glad you're living that way. Good for you. Keep going. That's fine. That's just as good as what I'm doing. That's just as good as what I've been taught. So there we are. There's what's going on in the world today, the new definition versus the old definition. By the way, I see a few people keeping notes. If you want, I'll be glad to send you my notes that I've got. So if you just email me, and I've got an email at the bottom of the page, so you don't need to take notes if you don't want to. Now, does this sound a little edgy to you as far as you being a Christian? Most people, this sets their teeth on edge, doesn't it, this idea of truth? Christianity, can you see what's coming in our society? Christianity, for 2,000 years, has said something opposite to this view down here. So let me share with you, and it'll let you probably understand why in the world Christians are being targeted today. What's our challenge to this new tolerance? What have we said for 2,000 years? God is not 5 or 10 or 15 different things. He's not Allah, right? As the Muslims say, he's not a Hindu God. He's not the Mormon God. Our God is a particular way, and the other ways are incorrect, right? There's one view of God. Number 2, we say, what? That there are things that we do that don't match up with standards that God has set up. And what is that called? By us not matching that, it's
Missing the mark.
missing the mark. It's sin, right? We say there's such a thing as sin. Can you imagine new tolerance, people being on board with that? Absolutely not. They're going to say there's no standard out there in the first place. What are you talking about? Everybody sets his or her own standards. So can you see the clash coming there? How about number 3? Jesus comes along and doesn't say, well, I hope you follow me, but if not, hey, there's always Buddha. Hey, wait around a few hundred years, you're going to get Joseph Smith. He'll give you some ideas. Muhammad's coming after me. Hey, if you like Muhammad, feel free to follow Muhammad. That's not what Jesus says. He says, I am the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Not a way, not a truth. He claims it. Number 4, he is the way to God. That's what we say. Not a way. He is the way. That's right from the Bible. We're not making this up, right? But can you see the problem from the Christian perspective? And then if you put all that together, look at the last point up here. If we just sang those ideas in church and then went out during the week and didn't say anything about it, we probably wouldn't step on toes. But what's our job? We've been told we're supposed to go out and deliver the message of these points to the rest of the world. And now we're getting a world that doesn't buy into this, that finds this offensive. And so that's why, if you ever wonder, why are Christians being picked on? It's because we have a different message. We didn't change our message. It's the tolerance people who've changed the definitions, and now they feel we're stepping on their toes. So there's the Christian challenge. I want to spend a couple minutes talking about the implications of living in this world of tolerance. And I've given you a list of those on the page there, under point number 5. What do you think that means to say our faith needs to be privatized? This is the view that's being told to Christians. We must privatize our faith.
Keep it to yourself.
Keep it to yourself. You want to go to church on Sunday? Fine. You want to have a prayer closet at home and bring your family together? No problem. The minute you step outside and you start preaching, you start talking to people out in public, oh, that's not good. You're supposed to privatize it. That's a little wall that you erect, and you go do that on Sunday, or you do that during the week in your home, but don't bring it out into public.
But we're the only ones commanded to do that, to privatize it.
Well, that's true, yeah. But again, I think it's because of some of these things up here. Yeah, you're right, we're told to do that. Maybe you've heard things like, hey, why are you guys bringing your religion out in the public square? You can't legislate morality. You ever heard that comment? You can't legislate morality. In other words, don't get a group together of you and try to pass a law. Right? Just go pray, if you must. Well, you know what's odd about that statement? Have you ever thought about that? When somebody says don't legislate morality, isn't every legislation, every piece of legislation, doesn't that reflect somebody's morality? Right? Why do we have speed limits? Because we think it helps the community. Why do we have laws against sex trafficking? Because we think that helps protect society. So that seems like such an odd thing to say. You can't legislate. You shouldn't be legislating morality. every law legislates somebody's morality. How come we're the ones that are told to go sit on the sidelines? Other people's morality gets into the laws. That doesn't seem fair, does it? So there's one thing, right? We're supposed to privatize our faith. I want to show you an illustration of the next one. I call it tyranny of the individual. This is from the San Diego Union Tribune. Somebody sent a letter to the editor to the Union Tribune. This is maybe 6 months ago or a year ago. For nearly 20 years, this is a school teacher, for nearly 20 years I kept a 12-inch Christmas tree on my desk. It was adorned only with small frog ornaments. Okay, no creches, no baby Jesus, no Star of Bethlehem, no wise men, nothing to do with Christianity. Little frog ornaments. My principal told me to remove it because it had offended a student and her mother. How many people? 2. Somebody had done it for 20 years, so, run the math there. How many hundreds of people had this teacher had? You had 2 people upset, and 2 people are in the same family, so probably child told mom, and mom, got upset. When I protested, it's the teacher again, he said, why would you keep it if it offends even a single child or parent? I made my decision for early retirement that day. Now, we kind of, smile at that, but isn't that a shame? We've lost a teacher who was at least, trying to do something suggestive, but somebody took offense at that. What if we had like a 20-year running battle down at Mount Soledad, because a few people, and I don't know the statistics, so I'm kind of winging this, but my guess is it was a tiny percent of people that were upset that there was a cross on Mount Soledad.
Basically one.
What's that?
Basically one.
Is that right? One individual. And look what's happened. I mean, finally, I think they've worked it out, but it took years and years and years and years, the whole community in an uproar, because of either a small group or maybe one person upset. That's where we're going. This tolerance thing is very prickly, right? So if one person is upset, everybody else has to change their way of doing things. One recent example, think about same-sex marriage. The whole issue of homosexuality. We're talking about, at the most, maybe 2% of the population. And again, so there's so much uproar coming out of 2% of the people. Now, I'm not saying, you want to discriminate or persecute people. I just think it's odd that the tiniest group can throw over everything that society has held dear for a long, long period of time. Let's talk about some more implications for our society. You see my next point down there, a loss of human rights? One more time, what does the new tolerance say? That every group is equally valid, right? Every nation is equally valid, however they want to live their lives. And so you think about China. China does forced abortions and some pretty terrible things to their people, but nobody's supposed to criticize them. After all, that's the way they want to live their lives. We shouldn't say anything. At one time, Libya, the country of Libya, was on the United Nations Human Rights Council. Now, does that make your head hurt to think about that? Libya, a place that did not have, I don't know what they are now, it's kind of a lost states falling apart, but a place like Libya was on the United Nations Human Rights Council. Iran was on a council for women's rights. That's even funnier, huh? I mean, you laugh so you don't cry. But Iran, well, why? Because you can't criticize them, and they are a nation after all. So sure, let them be on this council for women's rights, even though their women have no rights. What? North Korea. Are you kidding me? We're not supposed to criticize nations like that? Yes?
I think they go into councils just to make sure that the people on the councils don't get much rights, or they want to be there so that they are informed enough or to negativize that part of women's rights.
Oh, yeah.
I think they just want to be there because they want to make sure that they want to know what's going on. They don't want women's right, so they want to keep it down.
Sure. What an easy way to do it. Be on the inside. Have a chance to water down any laws that you might not like. But isn't that odd? Well, it's only odd from our perspective, from the new tolerance, since everybody has, each nation has his or his own truth, and that's the way it goes, right? So you're not supposed to criticize, not supposed to say anything about that. How about this next point down here? If we're in this world of new tolerance, and you're probably noticing this, it's not the head that matters as much as the heart. About a year ago, Sharon and I were watching a movie called Rio. It's a computer animated film. It's pretty cute, about a bunch of birds down in South America. And toward the end of the movie, the point came out. The movie, the tagline basically was "Follow your heart," and that's what we're getting with this modern tolerance. Is since there's no truth out there, you're generating your own. So who's the master and who's in control of things, and who gets to say what's right and wrong? You do. So it's all follow your heart. Do what your heart suggests. Have you noticed when you watch presidential elections and you look at the advertising, how much of the ads really spend time on intellectual issues? Most of them are hot button things that try to appeal to people's emotional needs. And I'm not picking on Barack Obama because a lot of people have done the same thing, but in 2008, he ran on hope and change. Those are hard issues, right? It wasn't very clear what he meant by hope and change. Well, 7 years later, we have a pretty good idea of what he meant by change. I don't know what happened to the hope, but anyway. But that's not just him, right? Politicians for a long time have all been image people, make you feel good about them. They have these cute little slogans. Ronald Reagan, just to be fair, Ronald Reagan, when he ran for re-election in 1984, said, "It's morning," and he didn't say this as his campaign people, "It's morning again in America." That was the campaign theme. You think about, what does that mean? What does he want to do for 4 years? I don't know. But it's all about the heart, right? It's morning again in America. And they had these ads of flags unfurling and farmers out taking their hay and cutting stuff. And it's like, that feels good. They have great music, you know? So there you are, right? It's all about feelings these days. It's hard to get a good intellectual conversation going. Everything's about feelings. This next one I think is pretty scary down here as far as implications go, and that's extremism. We had homosexuality. Nobody's supposed to complain or find a problem with that. Now we got same-sex marriage. What do you think is coming next? Because that's not the end. We're going to get more extreme views because you can't criticize anybody. So what do you think is coming? Are you hearing any rumblings out there of other groups that feel like, hey, you need to honor us too?
Marrying several women? Men?
Sure. Polyamory and polygamy. Well, I mean, why would same-sex marriage be it? And everybody say, okay, we're done. We've changed marriage. Let's stop here. That's not going to be the ending point. There are already groups, the polygamous groups are starting to rumble, right? There are talks out there. Hey, we love each other. Right? You hear that again, it's about the heart, isn't it? Anything else? I think incest is probably around the corner. Hard to think of now. I thought, well, that would never happen. Really? I think that's coming. And stranger things than that, I'm sure, are out there. How about transgender?
Yeah.
Right? We've got Caitlyn. Caitlyn Jenner is only the big names. They're coming. And we're supposed to accept that and applaud them and appreciate what they've gotten, what they've done. So get ready. A lot of things are coming. And then finally, the one that probably affects us the most here at Emmanuel Faith, religious persecution. And that's not far behind. It is here already. Have you heard some stories like that? For example, bakers that don't want to bake a cake for a same-sex marriage, and what's happened to them? Is that what?
$180,000.
Yeah, they've been sued and they've been fined. There was one, I think it was in New Mexico, there was a judge that told somebody who was in a situation like this that you're going to have to put aside your religious beliefs. In the United States. Right? So religious persecution is coming. I would suggest you pray regularly for Dennis and the people on staff here, because that's going to be a very tough issue for them to maintain biblical integrity and then to have that community out there. Because the people who are these quote-unquote tolerant ones are not so tolerant. They want to come after those that don't agree with them and force us, hands behind our back, right? They want to force us into an agreement with that. So religious persecution is not just around the corner. I think it's here, and I think it's going to be big time. So what should our response be? We don't want to end on just, well, okay, tough times are coming. Good luck. Right? So there are some things that we can do about it. Here's one. Just from a personal perspective, be prepared for what are called ad hominems. Anybody recognize that term? It's a term of argumentation. It's when you attack the person, but not the idea. So, are you hearing things, maybe not directed toward you yet, but things like this? Christians, you could fill in the blank, Christians are intolerant, they're homophobic, they're arrogant, narrow-minded, judgmental. Maybe you've heard things like that. Homer?
I heard one gal quite a few years ago, educated person, came into the office and she's upset about something. She said, I just can't stand intolerant people.
Omar's stealing my thunder because we're going to get to that in just a second. That's a funny line, Omar. I got to remember that one for future use. Okay, what's your response? Now, normally a Christian response would, the first thing out of your mouth would be, no, I'm not, and I'll prove it to you. I'm not really intolerant. No, I'm not homophobic. I'll prove it. I'm not being judgmental. And you end up creating these monstrous arguments to try to say why you're not the thing that you got labeled with. There's a much easier response. It's one word. So? Right, that's the answer. If somebody tries to put the label on you, say, what does that have to do with my argument? Maybe I am one of these things. Okay, so? That doesn't defeat the argument, does it, to put a label on somebody? Do you think, for example, do you think arrogant people could have good ideas? Yeah. Right? And people you don't like at all, that irritate the heck out of you, could have a great idea. So? That's no argument. That's an attack. That's a personal attack. That's not an argument. This will not get you into a good, clean debate about something if they start throwing terms at you. You say, you're just attacking me. Let's look at the argument. If you think so is too snotty to say, just say, well, let's talk about the argument. You're talking about me. Let's talk about the argument I have. I'm not the argument. Two different things. So get ready for ad hominems. They're out there. Here's another tactic. Ask some questions. If they're going to talk about religions, for example, you say, well, you think all religions are as valuable as all others? Oh, yes, oh, yes. Well, do you honor cannibalism? Do you honor headhunting? Sati, that's where you take the widow from a man who died and throw her on the funeral pyre, kill her. Do you honor female genital mutilation? There are other religions that do that. And I think you're going to find people get a little squirmy at that point because I think they're going to say, no. Right? They've got no option at this point. You're saying, really? You can put all those different religious beliefs on the same level? They're all equally valid? I don't see how they're going to say that. Here's another one. You could take something like Hinduism and say, you honor all religions? You think they're all as equally valuable? Well, how about the Hindu idea that the untouchables, they step around people, right? They let people suffer. Christianity has had a history, 2,000 years of taking care of the poor, taking care of the needy. The Roman Empire, everybody's eyes flipped up and they said, look what these Christians are doing. They turned a whole empire upside down because of their care and their compassion. Are you telling me that Hinduism and Christianity to you are just interchangeable, equally valuable? Right? So you're not having to defend anything. You can just throw some questions out at people. Not a bad thing to try. Here's where Omar comes back. Watch out. It's very easy to spot. People will use what are called self-refuting arguments when they're involved in this new tolerance. What's self-refuting? It's an argument that comes out of somebody's mouth that just destroyed the point that they were trying to make. It's like shooting themselves in the foot. So if somebody says to you, I can't speak a word of English, you're going to go, you just spoke a word of English. You spoke a whole sentence of English. Or somebody says, there's no such thing as an English sentence longer than 3 words. You just spoke an English sentence that has more than 3 words. That's called self-refuting arguments. So Omar, back on stage, tell me what that person said in the office.
She came in, she was kind of irritated, and she said, I just can't stand intolerant people.
Why is that self-refuting?
Because
She's being intolerant by labeling somebody else different from her as not as good, right? She's upset at them. Here's some other intolerant statements. You're intolerant. Well, that's the person labeling who's claiming tolerance, then that person should shut up, right?
You're not.
You're doing something different, that's okay, because I'm tolerant. No, they're not. You're judgmental. Isn't that a judgment? You just judged me. You shouldn't spread your faith by talking to others. Let's see, you're talking to me and you are trying to change me. Leave people alone. Let them find their own values. Why don't you leave me alone? Again, you got to watch it. You don't want to get into sarcasm. But do you see that these comments they think are so wise and so wonderful actually go nowhere. They just disintegrate. These are not arguments. Again, they self-refute. They self-destruct. They fall apart. You don't have to pay any attention to that. But I think it's important to let the other person know this is not a good argument again. Right? So the ad hominems don't work very well. These self-refuting statements get you nowhere either as far as arguments. So these are some of the tactics that we're talking about. I think it's really useful to show people that we're all intolerant. And we ought to be. We ought to be intolerant of certain things, shouldn't we? Aren't there some actions and activities and ways of living that we should be intolerant of? So let's try it out here. You're talking to somebody and you find out the person is a real fan of environmental things, right? Just loves nature and part of the Sierra Club and all this kind of stuff, but buys into the new tolerance. So you say, hey, look, I've got something fun I'm going to do this weekend. You might like to come with me. Oh, what is it? Well, I buy a big drum of industrial poison, and I go out to Lake Dixon, and I row out in the middle of the lake, and I puncture that can and dump it overboard, and I try to count how many dead fish show up.
Yeah.
You want to come with me? Do you think that person is going to say, well, see, I'm tolerant, I wouldn't do it, but if you want to do it, okay? I don't think so. I think this person's eyes are going to bug out, the veins are going to stand up, and the person's going to come down and tap dance all over you. So you might want to think about who you would actually say that to. But people are intolerant, and they ought to be, right? That's the point you're trying to make to them. You're not as tolerant as you think you are. You think racism is fine? Did you like Nazi Germany? And they're going to say no. Well, then you're intolerant, and that's good. Right? So there are places to be intolerant. So that might be kind of fun to try. Depends on how well you know the people and how fast you can run. But something to think of anyway. How about this? What if you're around somebody, you're sitting at a Thanksgiving table or whatever it is, and there's somebody that you know has been antagonistic, is not a Christian, and is trying to pin you down, make you look bad, maybe asks something in the area of maybe same-sex marriage, something that's really controversial. And they're hoping you say something so they can throw labels at you. Well, that's so intolerant. Here's one possible answer that you can give. Before you give your answer, you ask a question. You say, I'll answer your question, but could I just ask you something? Do you think of yourself as a tolerant person? Do you accept all beliefs? That's the modern view, right? So if they say, yeah, they say, okay, you buy into this? Yeah. Then you tell them your view. How can they come back at you because they just said that they're tolerant? They said they accept all views. And you say, my view is probably not the same as your view, but you told me that you accept all views anyway. They're done. Unless they're going to be two-faced and come after you anyway. Say, wait a minute, time out. I thought you said you were tolerant and you accepted all beliefs. My belief is not your belief, but you accept all beliefs. And so that's something to think about. Here's another little tactical tip that you might try. Think about Jesus as a terrific ally in the middle of a discussion. People like Jesus. They may not like you, but they like Jesus. So if you're in the middle of a discussion there and somebody says to you something like this, see the Q and the A, do you really think same-sex marriage is wrong? And you say, well, my view on marriage is the same as Jesus' view. One man, one woman for a lifetime. Oh, now what's the argument with? Jesus. Right? So they'll have a much harder time arguing against Jesus than they would arguing against you. So these are just little tips of the tactics that you can try out here. Watch out for two things that they may try out on you. I think we've talked about this in this class before, maybe even last time I was in here, the blind man and the elephant story. The people that love the new tolerance will either give you this one or the idea that all roads lead to God. So I got can you see that road kind of snaking its way up there, up the hill? Let's go back to the blind man and the elephant for just a second. If you don't know the story real fast, the idea is that in an Indian town someplace, an elephant comes in, some blind people have not met the elephant before, they don't know what an elephant is, and if you can see those people, some are touching the side, some are touching the tusk, some are touching the leg, and they come up with these different ideas of what an elephant is, and they appear to conflict with each other, and they're starting to argue, and finally the Raja shows up. He says, shut up. He said, you guys all have a piece of the truth, you don't have the whole truth. Now, how do you think that applies to religious pluralism? How's that going to tie into religions?
Well, where did you get your truth? What are you basing that on?
Well, what's the person who's the new tolerant person using this story to illustrate? Who are the blind men? This is a parable, right? It's supposed to illustrate a truth about religions.
Well, the blind man would be the intolerant people who say it is like a snake because he's feeling the trunk, or it's
Right.
a wall because he's feeling the side.
Sure. So maybe this is the Jehovah's Witness, maybe this is the Mormon, maybe this is the Christian, maybe this is the Buddhist, whatever. These are all the different religions, right? They have an idea of God, and they're presenting this idea of God, but they don't have the full picture of God, and the Raja is trying to clear that up. But do you see a problem with that illustration? These guys are all blind, and the Raja comes, and he's got sight. And he says, you foolish blind men, you're just doing a part of the picture here. Well, how did the Raja get sight if all the rest of us are the blind men? So the person comes up to you and is pretending to be the Raja. How did you get sight? What gave you sight? How come you're not blind like the rest of us? That's a pretty egotistical view, isn't it? To say, I've got sight. I can see everything about God. You can't. You're just seeing pieces of God. You're blind. That's a really egotistical thing to say. And you get the same thing with this, all roads lead to God. You say, well, I just see one road coming up the hill here. And the person who's the tolerant person says, oh no, you can't tell, but I can see that on the other side of this hill here, leading up to the top, this little building, there's another road, and there's a road off to the right. You can't see that. I can see that, but you can't. And the question is, how do you see all these things? Why are you in the helicopter and the rest of us are down here on our roads? Does that make sense? This is really bad logic. It doesn't prove what they think it proves. It just proves that they're not like the rest of us. They're superior to the rest of us. That's not much of an illustration there, but it's used a lot. Let me suggest something that you might want to get involved with. If you think this is an issue that bothers you and you hate to just sit and watch it happen, there's an organization called Alliance Defending Freedom. They put out a monthly little booklet, and this illustrates, for example, this one was a woman who was doing some anti-abortion counseling on sidewalks in Massachusetts, and they passed a law that said she couldn't be there. And she thought, well, why is that? That can't be. So she went to this group. This is a group of lawyers, Christian lawyers. And they took it all the way to the Supreme Court. And can you imagine the Supreme Court voted 9-0. They never agree on anything. They voted 9-0 that was an incorrect law that Massachusetts had. She's back out on the sidewalks, able to talk to women heading in there for an abortion. So if you look them up, Alliance Defending Freedom, they're in a terrific group. And if you throw a few dollars their way every once in a while, it'd be really good. So let's talk about the conclusion here. Let's start wrapping up. I'm going to get these last two slides here from Josh McDowell. And I liked what he had to say. He said, when you're talking with your kids, and of course in our group here we could be talking grandkids, he said we should be telling them, embrace people but not beliefs. Right? Don't put down the people, but the beliefs may not be right. That's what we want to go after and try to clarify. We should learn carefully and listen carefully and learn from people. We don't have to agree with them, but we can at least listen to them. And then number 3, here's the scary part, speak the truth, but be prepared for scorn or hatred. That's where we're going. And number 4, choose your battles carefully. I had a girl from Palomar College. She'd had me in a class before. She knows I'm a Christian. She said, I've got a biology teacher who's really pushing hard on evolution. She said, it's really bugging me. I'm going to go talk to the teacher. And I said, choose your battle carefully. I said, don't do it during class. She said, no, I'm going to go to the office. I said, okay, because you do it in class, the teacher gets real defensive with 30, 40 people out there. So she's going to be careful about it. But we have to choose battles carefully. And then in the verse that we use so often for apologetics, it says we ought to have a defense for the faith, but we ought to always do it with gentleness and respect. So these people are not our enemies. They have a different perspective. They're lost, but they're made in the image of God, so we want to talk to them and be gentle and get across what we have to say. And I thought maybe we could use this as the final wrap-up here. This, again, is from Josh McDowell. We're going to go back and forth. Tolerance means the new tolerance. Love will be from the Christian perspective. So he says, tolerance is going to say, you must approve of what I do. Love responds, I must do something harder. I'll love you even when your behavior offends me. That is harder. It's easy to nod your head and say, good for you. It's a lot harder to love somebody you don't agree with. And then I love this last one here. He says, tolerance says, you must agree with me. Love responds, I must do something harder. I will tell you the truth because I believe you're worth the risk. Isn't that a nice line, Dan? To me, it's a very positive way of saying I don't agree with you. I'm willing to take a risk of having you upset because you are worth it. We're all made in the image of God. You're worth it. So is this a discouraging thing in the United States? I guess, but we've got God on our side. We've got people who, thank goodness we've got a constitution that spells out the freedoms we have. We can certainly use that in many cases to defend ourselves from some of these attacks. I think we're going to have to be smarter than we've been in the past and learn how to deal with a society that's gotten very hostile to Christianity and have our eyes open. So thank you all for being here this morning.